What a place we arrive at this moment, and I'm so deeply grateful to our cantor, to our music director, to our chorus, and to everybody who's here tonight creating such a holy place. It is said in the study of religion that people join religious communities, and they're lucky if they get 2 out of 3 things. Those 3 things are, the first is community, people with whom you can share values and a good meal and a good laugh, perhaps. The second is a great prayer and music life in which your spirit can be elevated and filled and transformed. And the third is a real intellectual life where your mind is expanded and filled and enriched. And students of religion often say, you're very, very lucky if you get 2 out of 3. It's very rare to get 3 out of 3. My entire time at CBST has been focused on making this a community in which we have 3 out of 3. And the intellectual basis, unfortunately, in most of liberal Judaism, honestly, is gone. It's a personal self-criticism I have of the non-Orthodox movements, that intellectual pursuits of Judaism and of other things in synagogue life, and this is a real indictment of what we have done to Judaism in America. So there is no wonder that people are fleeing synagogue life as adults because it's not very challenging or interesting or provocative, or actually at an intellectual level one can chew and and experience intellectual growth as well as the other things. So for me, an intellectual life is an important life, a life in which ideas matter. Thinking through complicated ideas matter. Studying history and philosophy and from all different traditions matters. And I have been very lucky. I am not a great intellectual myself. I am a good teacher, and mostly I steal other people's ideas. And one of those people is here with us tonight that no one here has met, but you have experienced in so many different ways. And as I mentioned, 47 years ago, I walked into Dennis Dalton's classroom, and I was challenged, I was pushed, I was exposed to the Greek philosophers as well as modern political theorists, studied political and social movements, and developed ideas. And then as a senior, I don't know if you remember this, Dennis, but Dennis was my advisor for my senior essay, which was on the Freie Arbeiterstimme, which was the Yiddish anarchist paper here in New York City, which was the longest running Yiddish paper in the history of America. And while I was in college, it closed down, and its editor-in-chief was still alive, living in the amalgamated houses. Is Fran Dunkel here? No, she's in Europe. She's in Europe. She's in Amsterdam. Sorry, Fran, but in the same buildings that Fran Dunkel grew up, in the amalgamated houses in the Bronx, and Arne Thorn, who was the last editor-in-chief of the Freie Arbeiterstimme, was the editor. And I would go up to the Bronx and interview him and do an oral history of him. And it was under the direction of Dennis Dalton, because Dennis understood whether it's Yiddish anarchists or Greek philosophers, there is depth and things to be learned from this vast array called the human being and our condition. So all I want to point out is this book, which I recommend to anybody to read, that Dennis wrote, and there's now a second edition, Mahatma Gandhi, Nonviolent Power and Action. And tonight, I asked Dennis to actually speak tonight, digging into the Greek philosophers, which is something we don't often talk about here, but we do have a classicist who will be very happy. And the roots of our civilization in Greek philosophy and in our thinking about how change happens is there. So while I have not spoken much about this, it has deeply affected and impacted me. So I want you to put on your how shall I say this? If you're here tonight, you are extremely lucky. Now, I was 18 years old when I met Dennis, and he was whatever he was, but we have all aged since then. And here we are, 47 years later. and it is awesome. So any of you who have ever considered yourself a student of mine in any way, or you thank me for teaching you something, you have to begin by thanking the teacher of your teacher, as Rabbi James says. And there have been some very significant ones, but Dr. Dennis Dalton is one of the most significant. And it is to say it's my honor is not really quite appropriate, but it is appropriate to stand before your teacher. And so, Dennis, I stand before you, and I welcome you to our bima to teach us tonight.
Thank you enormously. We know that a thing of beauty is a joy forever. But joy carries with it intense pain. Sharon, help me get through this by summoning all the spiritual force that you can to allow me to express the extreme gratitude that I feel now. Tears are sometimes the only appropriate but right response. And so you see them in my eyes now. Sharon, when you came to my class just turning 18, remember the cause that you led. It was to stop Colombia's investment in South Africa. And you led campaigns as an undergraduate to achieve that cause. Sharon, when we sang, Free Nelson Mandela, we were so convinced that we were right. We were on the right side of history. Give us that conviction now. Give me the sense of rightness that can resolve this pain. Please. And so the actual title of this talk, following what Sharon has said, should really be gratitude, because that's what I feel now for Sharon Kleinbaum and her whole staff. I'm immensely grateful to be included in this celebration of her awesome career, the true calling the classicists among us know, arity, that inner excellence that she's followed to spread love and compassion. So let me make crystal clear at the outset that she has been my mentor because she has practiced what I only preached in most of my classes. I learned from her since we were together at Barnard during those years in civil disobedience campaigns that I joined her because she was my leader. And if anyone doubts this, check the police files. this case, they don't lie. So during the decades after her graduation in 1981, she has moved to become my North Star. Thank you for inviting me to talk tonight and tomorrow to pay tribute to Sharon, my one and only rabbi. Realism and idealism is the abstract title chosen for this talk, but the binary implied between them isn't meant to designate airtight categories of thinking. It's rather to suggest emphases that various historians or philosophers have given in their thought since ancient Greece and earlier or later. They may lean towards realism, these philosophers, that is their perception of what is, or idealism, that is views of what should be, but they are definitely not meant to be dogmatists, not intended to be closed minds, committed to only one way of thought. They are in pursuit of truth and not claiming to possess final solutions. I've chosen only two advocates of each position, realism and idealism, to illustrate such emphases. So we're considering first Thucydides, a representative idealist, a representative realist, the supreme historian of 5th century BC Athens, author of the history of the Peloponnesian War, and then to contrast his thinking with an archetypal idealist philosopher, Plato, focusing on his dialogue called the Symposium. Thucydides, in his history, depicted the civil war between Athens and Sparta, a horrific war that lasted nearly 30 years, ending in 404 BCE with Athens' defeat. Thucydides argued that it was rooted in the evil and irredeemable instincts of human nature itself. Human nature made war inevitable with its intrinsic inborn natives. Thucydides made the best case possible that inherent aggressivity is ineradicable. The causes are fear of the other that incites people to harm and kill, uncontrollable, egregious greed, incessant lust for power, and above all, the urge for revenge. In fact, the whole presumption of realism is grounded in a desire for revenge. Thucydides believed that the only escape from such ongoing conflict is to somehow adhere to traditional moral laws. But these are notoriously fragile. And when they're overtaken by vengeance, as they often are, then people plunge into natural moments of murderous fury. This is our inescapable impulse. If it were not, then reason would prevail, and we would have pacific polities led by honorable rulers. But this is a hopeless dream, revealed as such by wars fought in Thucydides' own lifetime, revealed as such by the wars fought between Athens and Sparta, but before that, between the Greek world and Persia. Thomas Hobbes, the renowned 17th century English philosopher of realism, was so enamored of Thucydides that his first work was an English translation of the Peloponnesian War. This was a text that my professor at the University of Chicago required in his classics class because he believed that Hobbes was truest to the original. I might add that I was born in 1938, and counting the Cold War, my own life has been marked by continuing war as it is right now at this moment. How then do we answer the realists' dark, grim argument? We may begin not with a solution, but an observation. A major lesson to take away from Thucydides' realism is how revenge continuously appears as a potent, contagious, endlessly destructive force. We often describe violence as reproducing itself, and yet violence can have its constructive side, as in the American Civil War. But this cannot be said of revenge. This is Thucydides' enduring message to be learned now as we struggle today with catastrophic wars. Yes, we must deplore wanton, unjust violence, but it's revenge that enables and feeds it to mutual self-destruction. As such, it's revenge that's indefensible. Thucydides described the revenge instinct in horrific detail as massacres between Athenians and Spartans and their allies became endemic, with fathers murdering their own families, their own children with their own hands, killing mothers, relatives, close friends, butchering whole villages, towns, cities. He pauses in the Peloponnesian War with one instance, massacre at Mycalessus, and describes how in one small school of very young boys, every being is murdered, including pets, farm animals. As Thucydides describes this single event, we can almost sense him weeping over its inconceivable, indiscriminate slaughter. For me, a dinosaur, it recalled the My massacre in April 1963. What am I saying? In April 1968. During the Vietnam War, because like it, even babies weren't spared, while the killers, American soldiers, burned down an entire village, shooting its inhabitants, and after went mostly unpunished, because the spirit of revenge knows no justice. Who will cry for My tomorrow? April 14th. Therefore, this is the monumental question posed by either realists like Thucydides or Plato, his contemporary. Why should incessant war and revenge prevail? Thucydides is a pessimist, an avowed pessimist, hoped only for brief pauses between these huge conflicts, containment at best through law enforcement. Yet moments of peace for him, as for us, are infrequent, happening when we catch our breath, the interregnum as between last century's First and Second World Wars. Plato opposed Thucydides. He remained an optimistic visionary. He never claimed that his ideal response will solve the problem of evil or suffering forever. But he makes his best argument in a dialogue entitled The Symposium. So we turn now to this dialogue, written by Plato at age 40, the same year that he founded his historic academy. He set the date of the symposium, though 30 years earlier, at the height of the war. Now, the word symposium means literally a dinner party or drinking party, but Plato turns it into a serious seminar led by Socrates, his famous mentor, heading the discussion by asking the select group to answer the question, what is the meaning of love? Now remember that Plato is trying to get at the reasons for revenge. And as we'll see, he follows the age-old adage, all you need is love. Except that a philosopher, and not a musician, he comes at it as a theorist. Socrates starts the dialogue by calling on Pausanias, who had a reputation in Athens as a notorious libertine. Pausanias was also an unapologetic realist who treated Socrates' question about the meaning of love with undisguised contempt, dismissing it as naive or inane. His replies to Socrates were curt. Love, he answered, is no more or less than lust, an unabashed desire for selfish satisfaction. Get this, to get this, we should choose as our love object, he says frankly, the least intelligent, the least sensitive person available, so that there will be no silly questions after having sex like, darling, was it good for you too? Finally, love is irrelevant to romance, which is a foolish fiction that fogs any relationship. The proof of this fiction is that in hedonistic Athens, it had worked very well for Pausanias, and at age 40, he's extremely proud of his conquests, and he makes people know it. Now, is this blatant characteristic by Socrates of Pausanias unfair to the doctrine of realism? Well, perhaps, but in this case, there were plenty of hedonists like Pausanias, so while the dialogue is hypothetical, the actuality is not. Now, Plato now tries to counter this realism with a modified idealism in the character of Aristophanes. Aristophanes was a renowned poet and dramatist, a fearing, fascinating figure in Athens at the time, fearsome because he was renowned as a satirical playwright, and he wrote a comedic play entitled The Clouds that satirized Socrates as a utopian with his head in the clouds. So Aristophanes opposes Pausanias by relating a classic fable. It's a myth that's familiar to us now, but then, of course, it was new to the ancient world. In this legend, Aristophanes fantasizes that at the beginning of time, two people were not as they are now. They were originally joined as one, each person with 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 faces looking in opposite directions, but aware of one another, and 2 organs of sexual generation. So as the fable goes, these odd twinsters were happy beyond belief. No worries about self-centered arguments or jealous sibling rivalry or any kind of conflict, just harmonious, pure bliss. And not least, they could make love to themselves. And they had no fear of infidelity. But alas, the gods, fired by malicious envy, had such contentment in a furious single bolt of lightning. Zeus and the rest split each happy soul into a very unhappy split self. The result was pure torture. Each self, divided so cruelly by the gods, instantly became plagued with terrible separation anxiety. All sorts of otherness ensued. And this agonized alienation was so intense that it sometimes caused lifelong yearning, desperately searching for one's other half. The discovery, of course, was rarely made, although when it did happen, the two halves instantly sensed true love, embracing them ecstatically. Now, this urgent search has been portrayed over millennia in films and plays or novels. In fact, it defines our desire for a soulmate, the completion of one's identity, desperately trying to discover the one, and so meld into the unique other self, a consummate union. And the immortal ideal of a soulmate is born in Plato's Symposium to remain with us today. For a moment, after Aristophanes finished, the sheer eloquence of this exquisite myth and its meaning created a hush over the room, and the conversation came to a halt. But Socrates wasn't satisfied. He furthers the discussion by claiming that Aristophanes is left out a vital point. Yes, Socrates agrees. The search is certainly to find a soulmate. But the point is that the soul in the mate is always viewed as being good, not evil. So Aristophanes has missed an important step, because at this crucial juncture, Socrates now sets forth his famous ladder of love. First step is sex, second, romance. But the third, the highest step or stage of consciousness, is when we seek love. It's to find the goodness in another. Now, obviously, vicious cruelty may eventually become the result of a relationship. But this is not the intention of anyone choosing a partner, to deliberately and consciously seek out or invite brutality. That would be not just masochism, but asking for self-destruction. In fact, we instinctively idealize our prospective partner. And this can eventually have bad results when our expectations disappoint, but this isn't our natural initial instinct. We wish for the ideal of goodness. This, then, is Socrates' argument for idealism. Despite what Thucydides claimed, human nature is not inevitably destined for vengeance because we make choices. And in life-determining affairs like love, this can indeed be a choice for goodness. Moreover, if we continue our search for goodness widely and viewing a whole group of people, we can perceive an abstraction called humanity. Humanity is a noble word, distinct from just a collection of humans. We realize this as the ideal of humanity. We look around us to countless differences in young and old, color or class, religion or caste, gender or non-normative and not, and we recognize an ideal of humanity, to realize that we are all part of one another. This is the meaning of the word humanity. It can have no other. To realize then that we're all part of one another is to realize the idealist's message. And that message is simply this: don't turn another into the other to justify a cycle of revenge. In the end, this way of thinking is inhuman. It's a violation of humanity and of love, its ally. I hope that I and Sharon have made clear that I was extremely fortunate as a teacher for 4 decades at Barnard to discover soulmates. I'm here to say how proud, happy, fulfilled I am to count Rabbi Sharon Klambaum among them.